Today we have a really special Hangout because it's all about A360 Collaboration for Revit.
Awesome. So let's get started, guys. So who am I and what are we going to go through? So I'm the product lead for A360 Collaboration for Revit. So we're doing a lot of investment within the Revit team to evolve the way technology is utilized in the BIM process. And we like to frame things in terms of yesterday and tomorrow and the things we're doing at a technology level to enable what we talk about internally as BIM 2.0. And one of the big investment areas, and actually the single largest in the last couple of years, has been investments around collaboration. So it's all about shifting things from locally collaborative workflows to socially shared workflows. And so when you think about the overall BIM process, there's this really linear and organized way we communicate it in industry. You can't go to a conference about BIM without the BIM wheel. So I'm giving you a BIM wheel here today. But you come away thinking that this is a relatively organized process as you move between these different stages. But it's not just the data that's moving, it's the teams involved that's moving. So this is a great diagram from one of our customers in China. So there's 14 different customers or project companies involved on this project. So 14 different people that needed to exchange information, needed to exchange communications. And the reality is that the way it happens today is this car that runs on IT labor and expensive hardware. That's how it gets done today for most situations. And so we at Autodesk looked at this and said, you know what, we can do better than this, because what we are hearing from our customers like yourselves is that increasingly our technology is actually getting in the way of the collaboration process that's desired on certain projects. And we want to get ourselves out of the way and eventually make it so we're really facilitating a deeper collaboration than what was previously possible. So let's talk about what that investment has been. There's really three key things, and then we'll do some demonstrations as we go. So the first piece is providing access to the project data for everybody. And just so you guys know, I'm going to show, we've just changed classes here, so there's going to be a little bit of conversation going on in the background, but we're here talking, and I love it. So let's talk about how we've made access to the project data better. So what we've done is we've changed a real fundamental about Revit. So today, unless you're a 0.1% of our customer base that has created a VPN tunnel between wide area networks with Revit server, odds are you're doing a sync with Central, and Revit on your machine, inside of your network, sitting right in front of you, running on a machine, is talking across your network to a place where that central model is managed. It could be on a file store with file-based work sharing. It could be on a Revit server. So there's a couple of different ways, but that's 99.9% of the situation. What we've done is we've changed the dynamics and effectively rewired Revit to take that building information model and putting it in the cloud. And that's the A360 Collaboration for Revit service. So this is cloud work sharing we're talking about here. You end up with an architecture here where you're still operating Revit as you always have. It could be locally executed on the machine sitting in front of you. It could be executed in a virtualization server that you'd be remoting into. Either one of those works fine. But when you hit that save button, you are now transacting across the internet through a 128-bit encrypted SSL connection to transact with that core cloud service that manages the models, plural, for your project. And that's the core idea of what the cloud work sharing capability does. So let's drill into this a little bit more. So the most obvious thing, and the thing that customers have been screaming at us about since we launched Revit Server, was we need to be able to have multiple companies working around the same sets of Revit models, and don't make us use the FTP exchange to get the versions back and forth. And so that's multi-firm concurrent authoring. And the other thing that we've heard really clearly is that no IT teams like to manage servers, update servers, modify config files on every individual's Revit machine so that things work. Nobody likes that. And we took that to heart, and we made sure that this solution is pretty turnkey from an IT perspective. As long as you have 2 ports available for HTTPS traffic, which is, they're pretty common ports, you should be good to go to transact with that service. So it's pretty turnkey, and we really listened to the feedback on this one. The other one is the building information models are directly accessible to other cloud services. When we start talking about A360, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. So that's cloud work sharing at a high level. I'm going to go through a couple of details, and then I'm going to stop and take questions here. So the first thing that we did is, if you're familiar with Revit Server, there's the idea of accelerators. those accelerators live inside of your local area network, and they do some caching for your instance of Revit. So, what they do is they reduce the amount of times your Revit machine needs to talk across your wide area network. So what we've done with cloud work sharing in collaboration for Revit is we've taken that accelerator and we actually install it on each individual user's machine. So what happens is that accelerator process is actively prefetching the deltas that are coming at you from other team members. And so what that means is when Revit needs to understand what's changed in the model relative to the local cache of data you're working on, in most cases that data is already sitting on your machine. So it's just a hard drive operation as opposed to a download operation. So we think that can deliver a better performance, and that's nice in a lot of different scenarios. So that's the first thing. The second thing is understanding the dynamics of the project that we support in the service today. So today there's a high trust workflow with cloud work sharing, the way the system is architected today. So if I'm in a project and I trust the other stakeholders in my project not to do dumb things, it's a great service for you guys. If you're not in a situation, and we understand that that happens in a lot of cases, this service may not be ready for you guys yet. I want to be open with you guys and so you guys know reducing the, or at least making it possible to have a lower trust collaboration model is one of our single highest priorities for the service. So this is how the service operates today as really our first iteration out on the market, but we're absolutely moving as quickly as we can to make it possible to control some of those things. Another item along those lines is right now, out of the gate, you effectively have central models linked together. So if you're working in an IPD model or a highly collaborative model, all is well. If you'd like to have a special version of your architectural model that everybody else links in, we have a workaround for you, but that's not the way the system is designed to go today. We can talk about that in the demo if you guys want to go through it. So that's the second big detail, and then the third big detail is how things work with non-Revit links today. So if you're going to have a project, you're almost always having a model with a lot of other Revit models linked in. Collaboration for Revit manages that for you. You don't have to worry about pathing or anything like that. If you're dealing with DWGs, keynotes, content, materials, all those things currently need to be locally or on-premise for the different stakeholders in order for the path to resolve. If not, you'll open a model that'll say, hey, I can't find that DWG file, and unless you really need it, you can keep working on the Revit data, but this is how the system operates today. So those are the detailed slides on this. I'm going to stop and take questions from Bud, and then we can keep going here.
I'm going to unmute before I start talking this time. So one actually literally just came in from Danielle and says, what's the impact on the network? How much bandwidth does this consume? And next, does every user within the network download the deltas?
Yeah, great question. So we get this all the time. So, at rest, the service isn't really drawing a significant amount of bandwidth. It's a push communications model, so it's not drawing a huge amount. In burst transfers, the best example of that is what we call a cold cache scenario. So I've never worked on this model before, so we have to download the RVT plus its links in a burst transfer. You're going to want each user to have the ability to ramp up to 5 to 10 megabits per second symmetrical, so up and down for those burst transactions. That's about as big a pipe as the service itself can give you. Anything below that is just going to reduce the overall experience. But remember, at rest, the service isn't drawing much, so it's not like every user needs to be able to pull 10 megabits down all at the same time. There's a certain amount of usage, or you basically need to take a factor of how often you think that's going to happen to determine what the overall pipe needs to be for your company. But that's as big a pipe as we can do. So the second question, yes, absolutely. Today, the way it functions is, let's say there's 20 users in a company. They're all working on the same model. There will be 20 different downloads of that data across your company's internet connection. And so is that perfect? No, absolutely not. As a technologist, I can agree with that. The service that we're dealing with right now in its first iteration, that's how the structure, that's how it functions. But what we're looking at moving forward is the idea of reintroducing an accelerator at a LAN level, so that, for example, an accelerator running on the Revit machine is actually going to look to that accelerator first, and if it finds the thing it needs, it'll just download it from there inside of your network, and if it doesn't, it'll phone all the way home back to the cloud service to go grab that delta. So we're definitely looking at that, and I think over time that's exactly how it's going to function. Other questions, Bud?
This one's more of a sales type question. They want to know why one person would pay, or why each person would need to pay $100 per person for access to Collaborate. Why wouldn't a firm pay that price and then the subscribers would just access it to that firm?
Well, no, that is how it functions. So, you can do the company will do a transaction to subscribe to the service for however many number of users they'd like to have in their firm, being able to cloud workshare and use A360 keys. When they're done with that, they can then allocate those entitlements to whatever employees they would like to go ahead and use the service. So that is how the service is designed. This may be talking about multi-firm scenarios where one company is paying for other companies. That's technically possible, but we don't have a full project-based business model where you could, let's say, purchase it for a project and then everybody across all companies can use the service. That's definitely something we're looking at. When we talk about business model a little bit later on in the presentation, you guys are welcome to ask more detailed questions.
And then one more, and then let's get started. The next part is, what happens if the internet cuts out in the middle of a large model upload?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's just going to, if you're in the middle of a large model upload, it's just going to cancel the transaction. So, it's going to say, hey, couldn't make it work. Why don't you go ahead and try again? So the only scenario in which you have a large model upload is the initiate collaboration, or when you're onboarding a model into the service. Because Revit, by design, and for 8 years now, transacts in deltas, it's not very common that Sync with Central is going to be pushing a huge amount of data. Usually it's on the order of 5 to 10 megabytes for Sync with Central, even if you're dealing with a model that's 600 megabytes. So that's kind of Revit's architecture today. But yeah, if you pull the cord or you lose your connection, it's going to cancel the transaction. And if you get a good connection again, you can go ahead and try it again. Any other questions, Bud, before we keep going?
One. Let me take a quick look. A couple just popped up. The ability for. One person wants to know, they're having issues, intermittent issues with their internet. How would they troubleshoot something like that? That sounds like an IT question, but.
Yeah, it's more of an IT question, unfortunately. I mean, the service itself, as long as you're working on a computer that's connected to the web with those 2 ports, and it's documented, I apologize, I don't know them offhand. I think one's 443, and the other one I think is 87. They're 2 common ports. As long as you're working on a machine in a network environment that has access to those ports to transact with their services, it should work. And if the internet connection goes down, then you're going to have some challenges, and I don't know that Autodesk is the best person to solve that for you.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit that you can always get your IT people in and they can check it and see if make sure you're not having any packet loss or anything like that. If it's a little intermittent issue, I think most protocols will keep uploading and downloading. So get your IT guy in there and have them take a look.
Yep. All right, so let's keep going here, and then we're going to do a demo, and you guys could ask some more questions. So the second big investment we've done to try to address what we see as a real inefficiency in collaboration today is around enhancing communication, because we have to remember, it's one thing to just simply say, hey, we can move data around from stakeholder to stakeholder, and that's really important, and there's plenty of solutions on the market that do that today, but our real focus isn't just on moving packets. It's about actually facilitating the real verbs of collaboration, and the real verbs of collaboration are getting a shared understanding, solving hard problems, providing feedback. Those are the real verbs. And one of those important ones is communication. We've made an investment here, so let's talk about that. So today, Revit is really not suited for any form of communication. You end up with people doing this where you've got like a drafting view that's set to open for everybody, and you could put messages in there. And as I kind of say, I've got like 15 different mobile apps that I can use for personal communication. And the fact that professionally people are writing in like text boxes inside of a view in Revit as a means to communicate tells us it's pretty broken. And so we took that to heart and we made an investment. And why did we do that? Well, there's plenty of companies that do chat systems. But what we think is a really unique part of our place in the market is really 2 key things. The first thing is we're one of the only pieces of consistent technology across the entire project. So if you're scratching your head and saying, what the hell is Autodesk doing building a chat tool? My company already has insert chat tool name right there. Odds are that the other stakeholders on your projects probably don't have that same chat tool, and it's probably not easy for you guys to communicate. But everybody's got Revit, at least if they're dealing with Revit data, So we think that's a really unique thing to make a frictionless communication. The second thing is you're using our authoring tool. So we know what data you're working on, and we know what data everybody else is working on. So we can connect people working on the same stuff in a seamless way. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. What it amounts to today in product is I've got a chat tool. It's called Communicator. I can directly chat with people. I can send screenshots back and forth, and I can have team chats about what's going on inside the model at any given time. We think that's really, really valuable, especially when we think about projects where you've got multiple companies working together. Those multiple companies probably aren't on the same technology stack. So it's really easy for people to be connected. The second thing is, we talked about that contextual awareness. What's that mean? It means you don't have to manage a contact list. You open up the model, I'll show it in the demo, it's going to tell you who else is in that model, and it's also going to make it easy for you to communicate with those people. And the final value is that we've taken, which you guys might know as Workshare Monitor or Blue Streak Activity Feed, and we've integrated that directly inside of the Communicator tool. So not only can you see who's in your model, you can also see the Sync with Central history of people. You get a nice little indicator if somebody doesn't sync with Central. So we'll go through all that inside the demo. But that's the Communicator tool. I think it's demo time. Yeah, it is demo time. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to switch over and fire up my Revit. And then from there, I'm going to do a little bit of demonstration. But before I do, Bud, anything come in through the wires while I was talking there that we should talk about before we do some demonstration? You may be talking on mute, Bud.
Hey, Bud.
Yes, I was talking on mute. Sorry. Yeah, I think we're okay. I think some of these we'll bring up a little later when you get back, but I don't think they're really relevant to where you are right now.
Super, super. So let's get started, guys. Let's just talk through a couple of basics. So, if I want to get a model into Collaboration for Revit, if I want to cloud Workshare a model, I do it through the Collaboration tab, the Collaborate tab. And you're going to see some buttons here you don't normally see in a Revit 2015 installation, and it's because I've installed a small add-on that enables this feature. So if you guys are interested to use the service, there's a nice documentation that steps you through what you need to do. One of those things is to update your Revit 2015 to the latest version of Revit 2015, plus add this add-on, and that's going to enable these buttons. So I see this new option for this model that's never been work shared before called Collaborate. That's going to go ahead and fire up this dialog, and it's going to ask me what do I want to do. The top option here is work sharing as you know it. It's going to just create a locally work shared model that could be put in Revit Server, put on your file store, put in your Tanzura, whatever it is you're using. If I choose Collaborate using A360, that's going to initiate a cloud workflow. So as I'm going ahead and doing that, I'm going to now pick the project I want to put it into. And we haven't talked about A360 and A360 projects yet, so I'm going to just kind of go through this quickly. In a little bit, we'll be demoing A360, and you guys can understand the connection. But this is the list of all the projects that I, Kyle Bernhardt, as an identity in Autodesk systems, am a member of A360. So I'm just going to put this in one of our internal projects, and I'm going to go ahead and initiate collaboration. So what's going to happen here is I'm actually going to turn on work sharing. And when I'm done turning on work sharing, I'm then going to put that model up in the cloud. A bunch of magic happens in the cloud where we do a bunch of different things across the actual cloud service itself. And then I'm going to be working on a local version of a cloud work shared model. So I'm enabling work sets right now, and let's see, just check out. Yeah, you can see my machine churning through memory and doing a bunch of stuff on disk right now. So a lot of action is happening on my machine here. And mind you, I'm demoing today on a Surface Pro 3, so it's not exactly a workstation, but it runs just fine enough to get things going. I'm doing that. I'm going to switch over to my other machine, which I have going here, which was in the same model as me. So unbeknownst to me, unbeknownst to you guys, I had another model open on my main machine. And so this guy's in the same one. So I'm Tom. And I know that Kyle's active because you're just looking at Kyle, but Kyle's not in that model right now. He's working in onboarding another model, so it's showing me that. But I'm Tom. I'm inside of this model, and I can see that Kyle has a couple of elements that he's working on because I've turned on work sharing display mode. So this is a nice feature that's always been there, but it's nice to understand who's doing what. So if I hover over things, I get this nice little flyout that's going to tell me who created this element, who's owning it right now, things like that. Right, there we go, wrong tooltip. So you can see Kyle B. Autodesk owns this element. It's just a nice little tool to understand who's working where. So we're working together on a model. This machine you're seeing now, I've remoted into. It sits underneath my desk in Waltham, Massachusetts. And my machine right here that you're looking at before is running on Caesar's Palace's Wi-Fi network. So completely different networks, but we're both working on the same set of models. So what I can go ahead and do is say, hey, you know, I want to move this wall up just a little bit here. There's no big deal. And I'm going to go ahead and sync with Central and push that change up. So let's grab this. And say, all right, I've moved that wall out. We don't want to have that change in the corridor. And now I'm going to update the transaction, which is going to basically change my local model. And now I want to push those changes back. So I'm going to choose to sync with Central. I'm going to leave a comment that says, corridor. And I'm going to go ahead and hit sync with Central. So now my machine, this machine here you're looking at, is doing a sync with Central operation. If I switch back here, we'll see that my model is being uploaded to A360. This is my primary machine, my surface. And if I go ahead on my network, let's go ahead and look down in Revit. A little snipper tool here. We'll see that, there it is. Revit is doing the transaction across the web up to the actual service itself. So we're basically getting that thing up and running. So we're in the midst of getting this model cloud workshared. So you'll see that it's actually saving, which tells me that we're almost done. So we've got a sync with Central going on one machine, and I'm uploading a model on the other. So cloud's a wonderful thing right now. So why don't I take questions while this transaction is finishing, if anything's come up, Bud, and then we can keep moving once this transaction completes.
Sure. So one question one person's asking is, at some point, will they be able to just dump the files into, using a web browser, just drag and drop the files up into A360 and get to them through Collaborate that way?
It's a great question. It's definitely possible. I think it's likely the way it's going to happen in the longer term. Right now, we need the Revit application itself to do some things like enable work sharing. There's a couple of scenarios where there's error cases where you need Revit available. So right now, you need to do it inside of Revit. It's a one-time operation. But yes, absolutely, that's an opportunity we've heard, and we think it's a good idea.
Right, and then are there another question that came up? One guy was mentioning that some of the buttons aren't showing up when he's doing the trial. Are there any difference between trial and the purchased version of Collaborate? No.
So that's a known issue having to do with the install. Unfortunately, it happens with the add-on if there's a file that's been modified by another add-on, and our installer doesn't update it because it sees that it's been changed by somebody else, and that results in the error condition you have. It's actually, we have a technical solution online. You end up deleting a file called uistate.dat. So if you're out there on the web and you're trying to solve this, just Google search Collaboration for Revit uistate.dat. And the first hit's going to be our technical solution. I'm going to walk you through fixing it. So back to this demonstration here, we'll see that my transaction is completed. This model is now in the cloud. If I switch back to my communicator and I switch over to the same model that we were looking at before on my other machine, so bearing in mind this is my primary machine, I'm Kyle, and I'm working inside of the same model. So I don't have those changes yet because my wall hasn't been moved up yet. I haven't done a reload latest command. So I could go ahead and do that if I wanted to, but I can now see that Tom, when he synced with Central, relinquished all his elements. So what used to be purple is now gray because nobody owns those elements. So I'm going to go ahead here to make a couple changes myself. So I'm just going to move this wall down. I'm going to regenerate here locally, and then we can go ahead and sync with Central. So I've made a small little change here, and I'm going to go ahead and sync with Central. Expanded the storage. This is going to be my comment here. Type it correctly. There we go. And so I've started the sync with Central operation on my main machine here. So sync with Central's going. If I check out my network sniffer, I'm going to see that Revit's spinning up the transaction with the web. Right now, there's Revit down here starting the transaction. It'll get bigger as the pipe gets bigger and the transaction gets going. But I want to show you something pretty cool. So if I switch over, Revit crashed. That's fun.
Well, while you're restarting, what size is the model you're working on? And by the way, people, when you see the CER, please send them in. We pay very close attention to CER.
Yeah, we actually do. And consequentially, I know the crash that just happened. It's a crash that we're fixing this weekend. So unfortunately, we let a bug out that led to a crash. It's related to collaboration for Revit. Shame on us, unfortunately, but we've got a fix coming out that's going to address that particular defect because Revit as a product is actually extremely stable. But we unfortunately let out a bug that caused the problem. But what I was going to show you, unfortunately, and we'll do it again so you guys can see it, is with our communicator tool, you're actually able to see when other people are syncing with Central. You get a nice little notification that's animated that's going to show you that someone else is syncing with Central. If you can go into the activity screen, you'll see an active card of a sync with Central going on there. So hopefully that might still be going on my other machine, and we can take a look at that. So this model is back up and running. Yeah, there we go. So my sync with Central is still going on my main machine here. We'll see that in the timeline. So I get that nice little indicator that's going to tell me that something's going on. If I switch over there, we'll see that Kyle's in the midst of a sync with Central transaction, and you see my little comment. So we've really tried to make it easy for people to understand who's doing what, and also reach out and chat with somebody if you want to. So, you know, if I wanted to ask Kyle a question, I could say, hey, and I've sent a message. Now this is from Tom to Kyle, and I'm Tom, a machine sitting in Autodesk network underneath Kyle Bernhardt's desk, talking to Kyle Bernhardt, a guy who's standing in Caesar's Palace on a completely different network. And so we've used Revit as the glue between those two different products. And once you know it, I've got a chat message waiting for me here. I can drill into it, and it's from Tom. And Tom's asking, hey, which wall did I move? And I can answer them right there. So that's our communicator tool. That's some of the core ideas around collaboration for Revit. And I've got one final thing I want to show before we switch to talk about A360 here. So if I go into my, whoops, wrong one. If you want to stay and collaborate. If I go to my Manage A360 Models dialog, this is a new dialog that you'll see with collaboration for Revit that allows you to do some administrative tasks for your model. So I'm working on the Audubon project, so I can go ahead and drill into there. And that's going to list my models, and I can do a couple of different things. So if I wanted to here, I could rename that model. I could view the version history. This is a nice one. So what this is going to do is going to show me my Sync with Central history, who has Sync with Central in this model, exactly when they did it, and if I wanted to, I can actually do a rollback operation. So, you know, some folks are worried about, hey, how do I back this up in case I need to roll back or my model gets corrupted? The service does that for you. So just with a one-button push, you can roll back the whole model, and then everyone else working on the model, the next time they want to open it up, they'll get rolled back to that same version and hit the ground running. So we effectively have a managed workflow to roll back models. We're pretty excited about that. So that was one thing to show you here. So let's go back to the project. The other thing I wanted to show you guys is we've got another capability here for really kind of a disaster scenario. So let's say, you know, I'm working as Kyle here. Let's say Tom took out a bunch of elements and let's see, nobody owns any of them. Oh, I forgot about that. I'm going to go ahead and take ownership of a bunch of elements. I'm going to be an idiot. I'm going to leave my machine. I'm going to go on a long vacation. And everybody else needs to take elements, needs to work on this model. Well, unless they happen to know my password, they're not able to log into the local model and relinquish those elements. So what we've built into the system is an ability for, in an admin workflow, to basically relinquish those elements on behalf of the user. So I've taken ownership of those elements now. If I switch my machines back to my primary, if I go right here, I should be able, there we go. So I can basically force Tom to relinquish his elements. So we built this just to handle that edge case. So that's a couple of things that I wanted to show you guys here. I'm going to stop and take questions from Bud, and then we're going to start talking about A360 Team and the connection between collaboration for Revit and A360 Team.
So one of the questions from Angelo, he wanted to know what size the model is you're working on.
Oh gosh, that particular model, I think it's like, you know, 60 megabytes or something. I use it just because I can demo it on my Surface because my Surface isn't too beefy. We've had real project teams using the service for almost a year now. It's about 10 months. And some of those models are really, really large. So there really isn't a theoretical limit to the size. It's just a matter of, you know, how long you want to wait versus, you know, an initial model open transaction. but the service itself doesn't really have a high limit in terms of size. It's just more of, just like regular Revit, how big, how capable is the machine you're using to run Revit. That's really going to be your main limiting factor. We don't want technology to be getting in the way on that front.
And then one more question from Angelo is, what's the best practice, open recent local model, sync, or go to the open from A360 start each day?
Awesome question. That's a great question, because I actually forgot to talk about that. So if you recall, let's go back to a particular slide I had there. So we didn't talk about this local cache, and I should have. So one of the features we built into this is, we heard from customers that everybody had to learn that that elegant ballet of creating a new local every morning, and just local file management. And we didn't want that to be costing an overhead for users using Collaboration for Revit. So the way this service works, you just always go the same workflow, and the service itself will determine if you have a stale version of the local data relative to central. And if you do, we'll have the deltas already downloaded to freshen up your local cache. So by design, you are always going to be opening the latest version of the model unless you have changes you've saved locally and not committed to central. So that whole idea around, do I have to go to central and remember to check the box to create a new local, none of that is in play here. You are always working on a fresh local version of the model.
One other interesting question also is, can you combine this with Revit over Citrix?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's a virtualized instance of Revit. So that virtualized instance of Revit running on a Citrix implementation would be transacting across the web. Now, if you're asking how's that performance going to be relative to a Citrix implementation where that instance of Revit is saving to a hard disk on the same server rack, well, saving to the hard disk on the same server rack is always going to be faster. There's just way less distance to travel for that data. But the real value here is that if you're in a project where everybody across all the different companies are using the service, well, that's facilitating everyone to cloud workshare as well as the connection to A360, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Take one more here, Bud, if you got it, and then we'll move on to A360.
One more. I'm not sure whether this is an A360 question or a Revit question, but I'm gonna read it to you and see what you think. Is there now or available in the future to have different display styles for navigation in the model in 3D? Current realistic style could be garish if you don't have all your materials dialed.
Yeah, I see exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, so that's a Revit question. You're still going to have the challenge if I don't have access to the source material libraries. We don't cache custom texture maps. So if you're not in a place where you can point to the source of that material definition, you're going to see the gray appearance. And hopefully you guys can guess what that future would be like if all of a sudden all of your project data was up in the A360 project and accessible for linking inside of Revit. We think that's a cool potential, and we're working on trying to make that a reality in the future. So let's jump out of here and jump ahead to A360 Team. That's what the Hangout started, and let's talk about why we've done what we did, and then we can talk about the connection between Revit and A360 Team. So, A360 Team, what's Autodesk doing with A360 Team? I mean, usually we only talk to the designers and engineers. Those are typically the tool users that are actually sitting in front of Revit, AutoCAD, Navisworks, BIM 360, Civil 3D on a regular basis. But there's a lot of other people on a project, and they're not necessarily using our software, but they have a huge involvement with the data that's coming out of those authoring tools. And it's not just the data that comes out of the authoring tools that matters, it's all sorts of other things, other pieces of data that matter for the overall project. And then there's tons of communications that are happening well beyond simply a chat in Revit, or well beyond a comment feed inside of a design. And really A360 puts that project at the center of all of these things, the people, the data, and the activities. And that's what A360 is all about. And so for us, when we were looking at the Collaboration for Revit service that was initially just doing cloud work sharing, we said, hey, this is a great marriage between a service that enables something we know our customers want to do and the broader collaboration that needs to happen. I mean, remember, our focus as a product team is, all right, what can we do once everybody has the same data? For us, getting the data to point A and point B is kind of table stakes these days. It's all about the verbs you can do, and that's what A360 enables. So that's the core idea behind what we did. And so it brings everybody together here around a common set of data, common access. So it's not just inside of Revit, it's also the ability to view these models on your mobile devices, your web browser inside of A360 with its great viewing capabilities. So remember, A360 is about sharing, viewing, and searching. And that's a really powerful thing when you think about the idea that the principal on your firm could be looking at the model on his iPad and providing comment feedback, and you guys didn't have to sit there and do a 4-hour batch plot and find a way to get a PDF on his iPad or her iPad. The idea that it all is seamless and in the cloud is a really powerful thing. So let's talk about the relationship. I'm going to skip past the demo portion of A360 Team because I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with that. When we demo, you guys can drill a little bit deeper. But let's pull up this slide. So how do things connect? So with A360 Team and Skyscraper, let's try to give you guys an understanding of how versions are surfaced. So if I've got 4 users working on a model in collaboration for Revit, the first sync with Central here is going to create an initial version. And that initial version is going to go through our translation pipeline and create an initial version inside of A360. So you've got mobile and web access to that initial version by anybody in the A360 project, not just the Revit users. As time progresses, if I'm doing Sync with Central, I'm going to be creating a version as I go. Other members are making other Sync with Central versions. Those versions are not automatically surfaced inside of A360 Team. What you need to do is you need to take a version and you need to use that Manage A360 Models dialog we were looking at earlier, and you need to hit this nice little button, and that button is going to trigger a server-side process to suck in that version into A360 Team for web and mobile viewing, search, and social interaction. So here, so once you've pressed that button, that triggers off a process to translate that model. We've created a new increment version inside of A360. So your team's ready to keep going again. So they can keep working. They're incrementing Sync with Central versions as the team goes, and those versions are being reflected inside of Collaboration for Revit, but they're not necessarily over an A360 Team today. Again, if you want to get that latest version, you're going to go ahead and hit the button. That's going to trigger the process. It translates the model in the cloud, does a whole bunch of work, and then you've got a new version in A360. So that's how the service works today. We're definitely looking at opportunities to automate that process. Our idea currently is that every night, if your model is changed, we'll push that modified version into A360 Team. That's currently our thinking, so I think you can expect that to change in the future, but everybody always asks how does this relate, so we try to put together this visual to communicate how things function. So that's the first thing, and then the second thing I wanted to talk about is your project structure, how you want to set this up. So typically on a typical project for Collaboration for Revit, one company is going to host the project. So they have a hub. That's the outer box here. Inside of that hub, you've got a project. That's the project that's going to contain the Revit model. And there's really 2 roles that are going to be carried out by the members of the project. You could be a project member, or you could be a project contributor. And everyone always wants to understand how this all works out for Collaboration for Revit, so let's talk about it. So for project members, those are the host company employees who are members of that hub. So they're going to be in the project as what's called project members. Then there's project contributors. Those are, a group of them are employees of other companies. So if you're bringing in consultants, they're going to be working on your Revit models. They're going to come in as project contributors. But there's also another group, and those are host company employees who are just in that project. So project contributors are free, so you could bring in all sorts of other people in your company that want to interface with that data on their web, mobile devices, and provide feedback and share, download that data. And that's a free capability. So there's really these 3 different groups. Everyone always asks a question, so we put this together to help illustrate that. So with that, I'm going to stop and take questions, and then we're going to jump into A360 and do a couple of demos.
So one of the questions was, can you show that translation pipeline button again, or location again?
Within Manage A360 Models, you don't have to have the model open. Anyone on the project team can do this. I could publish any model that I have access to. So, I was working on the Audubon model, so I can drill into the Audubon project. and then it's going to tell me if the latest version's out. So I know my structural model, the latest version is available in A360. If I want to make the latest version available of this one, I can click that button. It's going to tell me that it's going, and then there's a cloud-based process. I could shut down Revit right now, and it doesn't really matter. There's a process going inside the cloud to update that model. And if I jump into A360, we'll see right now I'm looking at Audubon, but very shortly this model is going to switch over the icon. It's going to switch over because there's a new publish operation that's being translated. So let me refresh my page, and hopefully I got the timing right. It usually takes about 20 seconds to trigger an update, and then the translation's happening up in the cloud here.
Do you want to tell them a little bit what you mean when you say translation?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bud. So there's a lot of work that happens up in the cloud. So we have an army of Revit machines in the cloud that are going to open that model. They're going to dump out the geometry of the 3D view and the geometry of every single 2D sheet in the model. And they're also going to crack open that data for building a search index as well. So it's really viewing and searching. So there's a lot of work that's going on. So that published operation hasn't come in yet, so I'm going to open up this model for viewing. Yeah, you know what? I think I freaked it out because we're technically uploading a new version right now.
Oh.
So, there we go. Yep. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I probably shouldn't have done what I just did. Yeah, there we go. Because we now have that little icon tells me that model is being updated. So remember, we click the button in Revit without having to hit the upload button in A360 Team. I now have a new version that's onboarding in here. So let's go look at the structural model while we're at it, just to showcase that part of the viewing. Then we can take questions as we go. So you don't create a project in Revit. You create a project in A360 Team because the project is bigger than Revit. The project is bigger than just the RVT files. There's going to be a whole bunch of other data that is associated with that project. There's going to be a whole bunch of other social interactions that are going to be associated with that project. And A360 is the place to do that. So if I went ahead and I can just go ahead and create a new project, that's going to get me started. So when you see that list of projects in Revit when you're onboarding a model, that's directly related to the projects that I am a member of in A360 Team. So I'm creating a new project here. In most cases, you end up doing what's called a closed project, and then you'd enable a project contributor access. That's the most common one for collaboration for Revit because you're tending to have multiple companies involved, and you need to be able to have project contributors enabled. So I've created a project right here. I'm going to, but you know who is Armando Darling. So Armando, you've now joined, you can come join me in the Hangout project. So I've created that project. And heck, Bud, I could have invited you as a project collaborator or a project contributor if I wanted to. But I've created a new project here. And now if I go back into Revit, and let's see, I go to my file open browser, I click on my A360 button. We're going to ping A360. It's going to give me a list of my projects. And, oh yeah, I forgot about that. There's Hangout project. So my project shows up because I built it over an A360 Team.
So here's a quick one for you. Can people collaborate with Revit if they're using different versions of Revit?
Major versions of Revit, no. So this service only works on Revit 2015 and future versions. And if we come out with a future version, the project will effectively have to be upgraded, and everybody will have to follow. So there's no scenario in the future.
And then here's another one for you. Is the Revit file size limit still 200 megabytes for Revit model performance reasons?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I've got a really good friend who's also quite a Revit user, and he'll tell you that there is no real limit. It's all about how you actually model inside of the project. So I don't believe 200 megabytes is really the limit. You could have a 50 megabyte project that's dog slow. If you do some things that are suboptimal, you could have a 900 megabyte model that, you know, just blazes fast. It's all about the modeling practices, and that's a much deeper conversation than we have time remaining for the day. But I would definitely recommend checking out some of our online forums where we've talked about best practices there, because there's a lot of really good experts who'd love to give you some feedback. So I've created a comment that's tied to this exact location. So, you know, I could go ahead and pivot away if Armando comes to this view and is trying to figure out what's going on. If he clicks this button here, I can now understand that I've got a comment about that specific object right here. So you get a nice little logical connection between those things. So we're pretty excited about this as well because we think there's a good opportunity to help solve problems. Because remember, we're not just about moving packets. We're about really doing the verbs of collaboration, and this type of workflow is an illustration of that.